We count it down to the top and most important Cleveland Brown for the 2023 season. It shouldn't probably be that much of a surprise to you listeners and viewers, but we're going to break it all down here next. The latest Locked On Browns. Your host, Jeff Lloyd, Sports Illustrated's Pete Smith, along for the ride.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound LGB on ELOB, the Locked On Browns podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hope everybody has had a fantastic Memorial Day weekend. Weather breaking, the excitement of summer in the air, all that good stuff. Today's episode of Locked On Browns is brought to you by FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. And we do have a little bit more coming from FanDuel later, so you guys might want to stick around for that. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd, at Jeff_LJ_Lloyd. 7th season now covering the Cleveland Browns. It's gone by pretty quick. A lot of heartaches, some exciting moments, hoping for more exciting moments ahead. He is Pete Smith. Browns Digest, SportsIllustrated.com. Pete and his team do a fantastic job pumping out fantastic content day in, day out. Make sure you check it all out, of course, over at SportsIllustrated.com. To all the everydayers who make Locked On Browns their first listen every single day, you're the fabric, again, of which this show is built. And to anybody new, my biggest suggestion to you is to be more like the everydayers and make Locked On Browns your first listen. The best way to do that is to subscribe to the YouTube channel with your notifications on, audio-wise, always available, always free, wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about, does the Nuk Hopkins and his current free agent status make any sense for the Cleveland Browns? And now this is where we give it away with Deshaun Watson being the number one overall most important Cleveland Brown for the 2023 season. We're going to talk a little bit in segment 2 about the effort Andrew Berry has made in trying to make the Watson plan work, which of course leads us to opening segment, Deshaun Watson, the number one most important Brown for 2023. Pete, I think when you get into discussions of Deshaun Watson, I think first thing everybody wants to say is, can he get back to 2020? And that's maybe unfair. It maybe be unfair to say about any athlete when you take away their single absolute best season and say, well, can they get back to that? I think the question with Deshaun here in 2023, and look, you're going to look back at last year, and I'm sure there's some disappointment as a guy is shaking off a ton of rust after missing a ton of time, coming to a new franchise, a new city, a new system, a new coach, new talent around him. And, he looked rusty. Well, ideally, most likely, if you were thinking realistically, rusty is probably what he should have looked like. But you compare that with the thought process of 2020. Pete, it's not, can he return to the same player he was in 2020 or return the same type of production he did in 2020? I'd say it's more of a, how much closer to that can he get? Maybe the 2020 version is unrealistic, but getting pretty close to that version is ideally what the Browns are hoping for.
Well, I think it comes down to he needs to start reasonably well coming out of the gate. You can't be, what he was like last year. Has to be functional, has to be able to execute the offense and make the team function. But when you get to the later part of the season, you're thinking he should be looking more like, a good quarterback, like a franchise quarterback, like a guy you gave up, all those picks for and the huge contract for. So as long as he's trending in the right direction, I think it will be okay, as long as that it's not like a slow dribble. It's a meaningful improvement where maybe he doesn't come out great week 1, but by the time you get to that rematch with the Bengals, he's firing on all cylinders, and the Browns offense looks like a team that is capable of contending, because that's what you got him for. As to whether it's unfair to say he should get back to 2020, I don't know. I just think it's more along the lines of timetable. Maybe that doesn't happen this year. I'm not saying it can't, but I think that should happen at some point. Otherwise, you're going to have real questions about what you gave up all those picks for. And not to say that other versions of that of Watson weren't good enough. It's just
exactly
you paid to get 2020 Watson, whether that's realistic or not.
But there is some to it, Pete, and we've talked about this in the past, and I know I've talked about it with you. With the 2020 Texans were piss poor. So, the statistical output he put up that year doesn't necessarily, didn't equate to winning. So, and the Knicks, for God's sakes, Nick Chubb, the Browns have a much better running game than the Texans did at the time. The Browns are hoping for a much better defense than the Texans did at the time, even though it had names, it had playmakers. They just necessarily did not get it done in 2020. So, a lot of that obviously was, in games where, he was just throwing and throwing and throwing and throwing because they were down by so much. There was no other option. But you can fairly say that, with the change here, the Browns are now going, because of this investment, and they'd be stupid not to, is to change here and alter, they're away from as much as they ran the ball in the past. And Nick Chubb is still going to get his. It's just not going to be the Kareem Hunt. It's not going to be the Dearness Johnson. It's going to be, when Nick Chubb is not running the ball, we're going to throw it. There is going to be no other plan B or plan C as far as running the ball. So to say he's got to go plus 40, you'd love the interception number to stay right where it is, obviously. Completion percentage, obviously mid-60s is what you're looking for. But he won't be tasked with having to hopefully carry this team on his back 17 games and then hopefully a playoff run. You're hoping for a little more equality throughout this roster.
Yeah, look, I don't expect him to throw for as many yards as he did with the Houston Texans, but
some of that does have to do schedule, weather, yada, yada, yada.
Sure. But you're not asking him to do quite that much heavy lifting, and there's, garbage time yards and all that. But what you are expecting is certainly at least 4,000 yards, and you're expecting to be efficient. If he's got like 25 touchdowns and 7 picks, and he's completing, close to 70% of his passes, and the Browns are winning, then people are going to be fine with that. It's about his efficiency, not giving up the ball, not making, stupid mistakes, and most importantly, not losing games. You certainly want 2020 Watson in terms of ability, even if you don't want to be in a position where you need him to drag your team, with no running game to speak of, where he's close to being your leading rusher in addition to everything else. But the fact that he was able to put up some of those numbers despite all of those other things that the Texans didn't have does speak to a high level of play that you would think, with a Nick Chubb running game and a good defense and all these other things that could be in play for the Browns, would then allow him to excel and have a really good season. Certainly this is good. Whatever Watson does this year is going to be compared against Baker Mayfield 2020 and Watson 2020. So that's sort of where you have to be in there. And obviously, like, towards the end of that season, Baker Mayfield got really, really efficient and really effective. So that might be sort of how you end up like evaluating this on to a certain point. But overall, wins and losses are gonna tell the tale.
And look, there's been players here for years: Myles Garrett, Nick Chubb, Denzel Ward. Obviously, all these players. The growth of Donovan Peoples-Jones over the last few years. David Njoku. We can name the offensive line. It is about one thing and one thing only. It's number 4. You need to start seeing a return on the investment of 3 number 1 picks. You need to start seeing the return on the investment of over $230 million in guaranteed money. This is the guy. he is supposed to be the guy. And your thought process was, well, he was in a bad situation where he didn't have enough around him. Well, we're going to bring him here. We're going to make sure he's got everything around him on the offensive side of the ball, and we're going to build a defense that we think can be commensurate to being a winning defense, to go in line with what we think this offense is. It's all about Deshaun Watson. There is no other way around it. We're going to switch it up here. Andrew Berry, obviously, now into the second year of Deshaun Watson, and made no pauses, no hesitations in going out and bringing in some top talent for his new signal caller. Make a break over to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs and NBA finals, because right now new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Look, FanDuel, they got great promotions every day. The app, it's safe, simple, secure, and easy to navigate. You get your money instantly. Same game parlays for me. That is the best way to go. I'm not a flipper arounder. I don't want to watch 6 games at once. I want to invest my time into one game. That's why I love the same game parlays. There is no better place to bet all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Jeff Lloyd, Pete Smith, we continue through here. Your latest Locked On Browns, Deshaun Watson, the number 1 most important Cleveland Brown for the 2023 season. Pete, the move made last year, Amari Cooper, obviously they were in the race for Deshaun Watson at the time. The David Bell selection, didn't get to see as much of that as we were hoping for in 2022. You go out this offseason, you make the move and the trade for a player like Elijah Moore. You sign a veteran deep threat, Marquise Goodwin. You sign the biggest wide receiver on your draft in Cedric Tillman. You sign Jordan Akins, a tight end who has a lot of history with Deshaun Watson. When you buy a big, beautiful house and you view it as an investment, you still have insurance, you still upgrade your appliances, you still make sure your yard looks beautiful, the mulch is down, the flowers, bushes, everything great, landscaping, this, that, and the other thing. You want your investment to work. You need your investment to work. So you start making other investments to make sure your major investment works. He now has a player in year 4 who sniffed 1,000-yard season and maybe could have gotten there if it wasn't a 2-quarterback year and maybe weather didn't go so bad late in the season in Donovan Peoples-Jones. Amari Cooper just came in, did his thing. Quiet, clear, clean, concise about his patterns, about his production, week in, week out. It took a little while to kind of get it going with Deshaun Watson, but eventually it did. David Njoku had many, many successes last year with Deshaun Watson as well. You have the running game. You have the offensive line. There's been a lot of put in here in trying to get pieces around Deshaun Watson because, look, this is what holds Coach Kevin Stefanski's fate. This is probably what holds Andrew Berry's fate, even though we know how much the Haslams were involved in this move. But this kind of needs to work for everybody. And it's been a tireless effort to make sure that they can get number 4 everything he needs.
Well, I mean, look, at the end of last season, you sort of got this feeling out process offensively to see what was interesting and what wasn't as far as it pertained to Deshaun Watson. And then you head in the offseason and you start to figure out what your offense is going to be. And they've made the decision that it's going to be a lot more spread, a lot more shotgun, things that Deshaun Watson has had success with, both with Houston Texans and Clemson Tigers. You get somebody who's done a lot of those things in Bill Musgrave, working with Chip Kelly, doing some of the stuff he did at Cal. So if you're going to do that, you need more receivers. And the Browns had a good workable trio of options around Jacoby Brissett, with the potential to keep adding a guy like David Bell. But since you're going to use 3 and 4 wide receivers more often, along with David Njoku and some of these other guys, you needed more dudes. And you get a guy in Elijah Moore who sort of complements everybody else because he can play both the Z and in the slot. He offers a ton of speed. He offers the ability to stretch the field, and you get Cedric Tillman, who can be an X. He can be an outside receiver. He can be a guy who can potentially be a possession receiver, whether they need him this year or not. Marquise Goodwin, another player that adds speed. He's obviously going to be competing for likely that 6th wide receiver spot. And the Browns have, 35 other guys out there competing for spots. So, I mean, like, they are looking everywhere to see if they can find him more help. And, we'll see what happens as this thing gets going. But on paper, what the Browns have done makes a lot of sense. What the Browns have done portends to be successful relative to what Deshaun Watson does well. And at the very least, the Browns are taking a lot of swings, and they don't have to connect that many times for this offense to be pretty potent.
And I like the way you put that because, and it's not really about establishing a pecking order now. And of course, there's the theory of, look, any positional group can get hit with an injury or two. Skill position groups, obviously, we know all the time. And, there's, a guy out for, 2 weeks. Guys will miss a month, knock on wood. You don't lose anybody for a season, but you know how it all goes here. So the point is to get as much talent in there. And, there's always the theory of these things tend to work themselves out. But the other thing is okay, so, oh no, Cedric Tillman really looked good in training camp, but we don't have the opportunity to really give him reps right now. Okay, he's a rookie. You drafted him in the 3rd round. That's okay. As opposed to what we saw in the past in maybe 2020, where Donovan Peoples-Jones, and to his credit, he did help. He did perform. But you put a 6th round pick on an accelerated path because you had to. Granted, for the most part, I would say it worked out, but that was not the original plan. You're not supposed to draft somebody in the 3rd round and, him to just walk in and be your starter from day one. If he does find a way to contribute, he does find a way to be part of it all. That's fine. But right now you're working with a former 1st round pick in Amari Cooper, the guy who has been everything and lived up to that 1st round, draft pick that was originally slated into him, even though he is on his 3rd team now. Donovan Peoples-Jones' growth path has been fantastic. Elijah Moore, Pete said it, I said it. We both thought that this was a guy who had the ability to go in the 1st round, fell to the 2nd round, ended up in a terrible situation with the New York Jets quarterback play. And because Aaron Rodgers needed to bring in his favorite birthday party friends, Elijah Moore was not going to get the opportunity that they thought they were going to be able to get past and give Elijah Moore that opportunity. Browns came in, swooped in, go with a swap of picks. So essentially the Browns drafted a wide receiver in the 2nd round in Elijah Moore, drafted a wide receiver in the 3rd round in Cedric Tillman. Marquise Goodwin. Now, this is one of those things where, Marquise Goodwin is kind of like that old veteran that it's not going to be an every week thing. There's going to be a week where there's probably a couple of select matchups where, hey, they're always going to put their safety. If we put this guy here, that guy, you want to know what? Marquise Goodwin, if he can do anything to this stage in his career, he can still run. You do have a chain mover type of guy in David Bell if that opportunity arises for him to get the playing time he needs. You go to the tight end room. Aikens, obviously familiar with Deshaun Watson's play. David Njoku, if you put together what could have been a 17-game season for him last year, for those of you that questioned the money that he was given, if you prorated those stats over 17 games, you all would have found a large way to shut up because he would have been in line with what the money he was given. You have Nick. There's still a question mark about the way the rest of that running back room is going to go out. But, there's not much more you could have done, and we will get to it in segment 3 and whether or not you're going to go thermonuclear with this and just go crazy, obviously. But Pete, you've given this every opportunity to be good, as far as, he's going to get summer will not be limited like it was last year because they had to, got him in, but then they had to basically hand everything over to Jacoby Brissett because he was going to be the quarterback for this team for the first 11 games. They have the chance to hit the ground running because it is just Deshaun and these guys, and they all need to find a way to make it all work.
Yeah, I mean, look, after Amari Cooper, David Njoku is really your number 2, and then figuring out everybody else, and you don't need them to.
And if David Njoku's not your number 2, and he becomes that 3rd option, the receptions may go down, but the yards per catch will probably go up drastically.
Well, it also would suggest that somebody was good. like somebody had to step up to be good enough to do that.
He will wear number 8, and his name is Elijah Moore. I'm not
Well,
gonna
I mean,
that,
and,
but go
and
ahead.
that would be certainly the best situation, because then you have all of these things. Like the Browns have a ton of size, and Elijah Moore, who's not, short, not small, gives
Just
you
get lost in all the hecticness.
Yeah, I mean, it's such the way they can line up guys puts a lot of pressure on opposing teams, corners and safeties, and how they want to match these guys up. But look, the Browns have given themselves the opportunity where they can allow guys to figure out where they best fit. We know how guys are going to line up, but in terms of frequency and all that's sort of be determined, and that's where you want it to end up. So they're in a good spot. Now it's just a question of making it all work, and obviously the pressure's on Watson to sort of make that happen, which is why it's good that he's the one guy that had to be at OTAs, and he is. So the rest just needs to play out and take care of itself.
He's never going to get that opportunity. He's never going to. He will get crushed. He needs to go to every OTA for the rest of his life. He'll get crushed otherwise. Look, I mean, granted, things go well. The God forbid they find a way to win a Super Bowl, maybe things will change, but he will get crushed if he never shows up for an OTA. That's just the way it's going to work for Deshaun Watson. And granted, look, a lot of that is, he put it upon himself. We're going to get here to segment 3. There's basically a purple elephant out there. We're going to discuss that here. So everybody makes Locked On Browns their first listen every single day. And I'm talking to the everydayers. You guys are the absolute best. To any of the new traffic coming through here, the best way to become like the everydayers and make Locked On Browns your first listen is by subscribing to the YouTube channel, having notifications on. So when the content drops, you guys are there to absorb it. It connects you right away. Notifications on your phone. Audio side of Locked On Browns, always available, always free wherever you get your podcasts. The stories are going to be written, Pete. Nobody's going to stop anytime soon until he finds his new home. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins and Deshaun Watson had a relationship together with the Houston Texans. DeAndre inevitably moved on to the Arizona Cardinals. The Arizona Cardinals tried to move him, maybe felt it was best and just found no way to work it out. So eventually cut ties, as the Arizona Cardinals appear to be doing everything they can to secure the number 1 overall pick in the 2024 NFL draft. He will have suitors, and he will have more established NFL teams as suitors, probably the Kansas City Chiefs, probably the Buffalo Bills. Browns fans, Nuk. Well, how do you do it? First off, you would probably have to say goodbye to Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper has been, in his time here, and look, the one thing about Amari Cooper, he has been nothing but a solid NFL player in his time in the league. There's times where maybe, people hope for more, this, that, and the other thing. But as far as doing everything that is asked of a guy that you were paying, Amari Cooper has done that. He has never been an issue. I think the situation he was put into last year, you saw a guy who really, really just a pro's pro. Nobody, wanted to walk into that situation with a new team and have to play with the backup quarterback for the first 11 games. He did it and did it admirably. Close out the year strong, 9 touchdown receptions, over 80 receptions, over 1,100 yards. It would probably cost you a player like that, or it would cost you the future with a player like Donovan Peoples-Jones. Pete, is it overkill? Is it something that would just set this offense over the top? Or is this just lip service due to the connection they had? And then, of course, there is the possibility, Pete, that maybe they're not even on his radar.
Well, I mean, the Browns could theoretically do it. I understand why people would think that would work. Personally, I don't see it because beyond Amari Cooper, I think the investment you have in Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's a 6th-round pick who's done well for himself. He's sort of like the program guy. He's done everything the right way. Yep. He's a valuable guy in the locker room. All these positive things, which is why it's going to be, people who are writing him off as an extension guy. It's very tough for me to buy into that for that reason. But if you bring in DeAndre Hopkins, you're essentially sending him to the bench, which it's not a slap in the face because it's the NFL and it's you're trying to win,
Business. Yep.
but it's not a good look either for guys who
Potential free agents, late round draft choices, undrafted free agents.
Like,
what
message are you trying to send? And obviously, for the people who are saying, well, we want Hopkins, it's win now. So, I mean, like, I understand it. One of the other problems I have with this is all I heard all offseason was how slow the Browns receivers are. They aren't slow, but this is all I heard. You have a bunch of guys who are like 6'2", 210 who run 4.5s or 4.4s, and people are like, they're too slow. And you want to bring in a guy would be the slowest guy outside of David Bell in this offense.
And and there is this though. Look, Nuk Hopkins has that suspension. So there's something within yourself when you start looking for something else to put in your body. I remember this, what was it, Golden Tate, way back, probably 7-8 years ago now. When you in your mind start thinking you need a competitive edge, the worst thing in the world is when it seems like you're starting to doubt yourself.
Sure. And the other part of the last thing that's a key in this is it's a rental, which you're doing with Za'Darius Smith. But like, here's the difference. There's an easy path to the field for Za'Darius Smith. There's no complications with it. No one's getting nobody's hit to the back burner other than maybe Lonnie Phelps, who's an undrafted free agent rookie. You're not saying to Donovan.
He's not going to get over Lonnie Phelps anytime soon, guys.
You're not saying to DPJ, yeah, you might as well, sit this one out. Like, that's where it's different. Donovan Peoples-Jones was a very effective player for you. He cost very little again this year. I think they're going to lean into that. Like, I understand the idea that like he's available now. Other guys may not be, so they should pursue him. But if another guy were to come available, whether it's a trade or whatever, you don't want to sort of handcuff yourself to this one and then not be able to take that one or sign a defensive tackle or whatever. Like, eventually, yes, the Browns can do a lot of things with money to make things work, but I think ultimately this is one that's going to make the cap situation not worth it. And I don't think DeAndre Hopkins wants to come to Cleveland because of the fact that he would potentially be the second option here. I think it's more palatable to be the second option in Buffalo because they don't run the ball anyway. And you're going to get a ton of passes and everything else, or be the number 2 option in Kansas City potentially because you're their only outside threat because Travis Kelce does everything in the middle. I think those are all more interesting options than the Browns. And maybe there's a wild card team. Like, people will tell you that maybe he signs with the New England Patriots. I'll believe it when I see it, because that's a dumpster fire situation with their offense and what that would have.
You running to go play with McCorkle Jones? I certainly ain't.
And Bill O'Brien again, who traded you for
nothing. Apparently he did not like the fact that you had several children who came to practice.
Yes. So like, there's a lot of things where I don't see it. So I think he's going to end up with the Chiefs, the Bills. I think it's a good move for those teams. I think it makes a ton of sense for those teams. I just don't think it makes sense for the Browns. And I don't think the Browns, by not doing it, are somehow at some massive disadvantage.
And even look, obviously the Moore deal was done before, we knew Hopkins was available. That's before Hopkins was essentially now free. And by free, we don't necessarily mean free, but even still, if you're telling me I'm getting Elijah Moore dirt cheap for 2 years, or I got to go pay the freight on DeAndre, I still would have done the Moore deal. I think the potential is there, and you're getting a player who's maybe ascending, where with that fear, and this is what it is. Look, Nuk Hopkins could go out and easily put up 80 for 1,000 this year. But we're talking with former guys and former players, and I still remember when the whole Golden Tate thing went down. I got a message from Dan Orlovsky, and he's like, you kind of hit the nail on the head with that tweet. He's like, it's not really something I can say. But once a player starts to doubt themselves, that kind of tells you that, what you need to know as to where they think they are. Hey, are they still on their eyes, or are they already thinking the sun's starting to set and they're trying to do everything they can to keep themselves on top? I do not have those concerns about Elijah Moore. And the fact that Elijah Moore comes here with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder makes the movie even that much more appealing. Look, I understand Nuk Hopkins is the bigger name. I get it. I'm not dumb. I'm not stupid. But I think a lot of people do not understand the potential in a player like Elijah Moore. Pete, I know you do. I know I do. This was a guy we clamored about. There was really no way it was going to work back then. But you add that to DPJ, who probably should give you even a little bit better, possibly better production this year. Maybe the problem is going to be that there's too many mouths to feed, so it comes down. Amari's still going to do his things. And then Elijah Moore, still Njoku, and then there's other guys after that they're going to chime into this, because the problem is you bring Nuke in, and it's a situation where, okay, well, how do we find 110 targets for him this year?
Right, and I think part of the thing that some fans, the reason why they want a guy like DeAndre Hopkins is it will please critics, and it will please media people to then sort of embrace them as a team that can win it all. When the reality is, whether you add Hopkins or not, the questions the Browns have remain the same. Does Deshaun Watson return to the form he showed in 2020, and do the Browns play defense? And those things, those are valid whether you add Hopkins or not. So not adding him doesn't change that equation. Maybe DeAndre Hopkins makes life slightly easier on Watson, but I don't think it's enough to warrant continuing to throw money at that position, because this is the situation you found yourself in with Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham that didn't work. I think they're better off going with the young players that they've got, hungry players, all that, and using that to their advantage. If you want to use the Zadarius Smith comparison, I think Amari Cooper is that guy, and then Elijah Moore and DPJ are the Abanya Okoronkwo in that scenario where you have the hungry ascending player potentially behind that the veteran guy. I don't think you need to continue getting older at that position. And Marquise Goodwin's effectively might as well just be cut at that point.
There's no question about that. I agree with you 100% there. But the point is who is the most important player? Who is the most important receiver? The one who's open. That's who you throw to. And those things get cloudy. And look, Nuke would come in with a bigger reputation than even Amari Cooper. It would just, for me, it's just going to muddy the waters. And, you might be bringing in a player that, it's a little bit closer to the 19th hole than he is starting the back nine. Pete Smith @Pete Smith _ Browns Digest, SI.com. Pete and his team over there do a fantastic job. The content day in, day out. Again, definitely one of my favorite sites. Definitely one of my go-tos every day content-wise. So make it yours as well. Myself, Jeff Lloyd, @Jeff_LJ_Lloyd. Locked On Browns, always available, always free, audio-wise. If you want to become one of the everydayers, easiest way to do that is by making Locked On Browns your first listen by subscribing to Locked On Browns YouTube page. Notifications on. So when the content drops, it comes right to your phone, and you guys are there to absorb it. Appreciate everybody as we send here through another week here on Locked On Browns. Again, hope everybody had a fantastic Memorial Day weekend. It's there. Summer is there. It's knocking at the door. All get a chance to enjoy ourselves, relax a little bit before football goes full blown. You got to keep in mind, it's going to be a little earlier this year, Browns wise. Obviously, the Browns with 5 preseason games. 4 preseason games. Obviously, Hall of Fame weekend for Joe Thomas. So for Browns football, it is going to start a lot earlier. So for all these, get your summer thrills in now. This has been your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound. LGB on the LOB. Let's go, Browns.